All right, we're now recording. This is Maya Zahira. I don't remember the exact date. What's today's date?
February 24th.
February 24th, 2020. We're at the, is it Tamara or Tamara?
Tamara.
Tamara Spiritual Center in Tucson, Arizona. And this is a talk on false light entities, what they are, how to identify them, what to do if you encounter one, and so much more. Before we get into that content, I'd like to take just a few moments to set sacred space, if that's all right with all of you. So we're going to keep it pretty simple tonight. We're just going to take some time to ground. So if your legs are crossed, I'd like for you to uncross them, straighten your spine, and really take some deep inhales through your nose, inhaling all the way down your midline, all the way down into your root chakra. And then as you exhale, allowing any tension from the day, any stress, any false limiting beliefs, anything that's not serving you, to gently release, asking your guardians, your guides, or your higher self, or earth energy to receive any of that energy that's not serving you. So you gently release it so it can be transmuted. We establish a beautiful bubble, a beautiful grid of protection around the boundaries of this property, of this spiritual center, establishing a clear, resounding vibration that has the intent that only energies that are aligned with your will, my will, our collective will, and the energies of divine source and the vibration of love are the only energies that are allowed to be present within this space. We ask for truth, for clarity, for peace, for love, for groundedness. Take a moment to breathe either into your heart space or into your abdomen, connecting with your own inner essence. First and foremost, connecting with your own inner wisdom. Before connecting outside of yourself, connecting within. Because you are so much wiser than you know. When you get truly quiet within yourself, those answers are there. Take another really deep cleansing breath. Inhale and exhale. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. So I often do much longer ones than that, but today we have a lot to talk about, and I also have a feeling we'll have plenty of questions. So hopefully that was enough to help us get grounded, and it's also important to set, as you all know, I can tell you all already know this, it's important to set healthy energy boundaries at all times and to just be really clear with what you're doing and how and why and what energies are allowed. So that's why we did that. Okay, I am going to be glancing at my notes now and then because we've got a lot to cover. And at the clock too, we are right on time. That's good. Okay, so what I'd like to do is start off just giving you a bit of information about me. This class is not about me. This is about false light entities. And what to do about them. But I feel like it's super important to really understand the source of the information. If someone is telling you something, who is that person and why do they know? I think it's too common in spiritual circles, in general, using that term generally. It's just so common for people to just believe whatever a teacher says. And I want to encourage you to not believe what I say just because I'm up here and I say I've been doing this for a long time. I want you to come to your own conclusions. And I'd also like for you to know a little bit about my background and why I know what I know. And when I say I know, that's because I do believe that what I'm saying is the truth. Like, I know this, but you might know something different, and that's okay. Okay, so as you already know, I recently moved here from the Kansas City area. I lived out there for a long time. And I tell people that I've been a spiritual teacher for 25 years, but in reality, it's been even longer than that. Because I basically when I say 25 years, I'm only counting my adult years. Because I was actually doing spiritual teaching in formal sorts of ways, even when I was in high school. I remember leading a huge auditorium of teenagers in prayer. I don't know, there were a lot of people there. It was a pretty big auditorium. And that was very natural for me. And even when I was young, when I was a little kid and even into high school and adolescence, I was having all sorts of spiritual experiences. I was having mystical visions, having dreams, and actually I'm sure many of you here have had similar experiences where you've had experiences since you were young, because you're all spiritual seekers here too. But this didn't start 5 years ago. I was having these experiences even when I was young. So I always was a very spiritual person, and I've always been a teacher. And then over the years, what I was teaching ended up evolving. So as you know now, well, you may or may not know, now my specialty is in psychic protection. That's what people come to me for, is they're needing assistance with their spiritual discernment and how to interpret things that are going on in their spiritual world. But before I got into working in this exact field, I've been a Reiki master for over 20 years. I was teaching energy work and teaching psychic development, and I was doing a lot of women's empowerment kind of stuff for many years when I was in Kansas City. And then I ended up having a really intense experience in 2016. And that's what I talk about in my book, Darkness Disguised as Light, The Hidden Truth About Psychic Protection and the Illusion Matrix. That's a really long mouthful of a title. But Darkness Disguised as Light. I'm not going to go into the entire story here. If you want to know exactly what happened, you can either get the book or on Amazon. I think you can even read it for free on Kindle Unlimited. I don't make hardly any. If you've ever published your own book, you don't make squat from self-publishing. So I'm not trying to sell you anything. If you're interested in the story, then you can get it on Kindle or right here. But I will say this. Before I went through that experience of major psychic attack in 2016, I was a very love and light, fluffy energy healer. There's nothing wrong with being a love and light, fluffy energy healer. We need them. We need someone that we can go to and just have an kind of energy healing session. And we need to just be able to relax and feel the beauty of that. So there's nothing wrong with that. But that's what I was. And I also would have freely admitted to you that if I had had a client come to me who had a really bad energy attachment of some kind, like some kind of spirit attachment or evil spirit or something, I would have freely admitted to you that I would not want to work on them. I only wanted to work with the positive stuff, and anything that was super negative like that, I would want to refer them out. And I used to joke that I didn't want to touch any of that stuff with a 10-foot pole. Now, I'll say that actually healthy caution is a good thing. If you don't have the proper training, you shouldn't be working with a really nasty spirit, for example. That's just dangerous. But I didn't set out to do this work. It really ended up being a calling, something that I was placed in the path to do this. So I am going to give you a little nutshell of what happened in 2016, so you have some context. So there I was, this love and light energy healer, and I went to a colleague for a consultation. Now I want to point out here that I never identify who this person is, because this person, there were some problems. I don't identify who this person is because that's not what this is about. This kind of issue happens. It's very, very prevalent. So it's not about this person, it's about the issue. So I went to this colleague for a consultation, and the consultation was, I wanted to get a second opinion on a minor psychic attack issue that I was observing in my world. There was a sexual predator who was working in the spiritual community, and I felt that he was sending some negative juju my way because I think he was afraid that I was going to tattle on him. So he was acting proactively to try to, and so I was noticing some minor symptoms. I was aware back then of what psychic attack was. I used to teach classes on psychic protection, but I had never had a significant experience. And boy, did I have one. I went to this colleague asking her for her second opinion on, well, what do you think I should do? Blah, blah, blah. And then afterwards, I came under the worst psychic attack imaginable. And I'm talking demons in my house. I'm talking lights flashing. I'm talking there's a spiritual, crazy, scary spiritual being that shows up on the video that I take for my business. I take a video and I demonstrate how to burn sage. I'm showing like how to do some simple clearing techniques, and I go to watch the video afterwards, and there's this entity on the video. Okay, and this went on for 6 weeks. It wasn't just me seeing demons, but it was beyond that. It was like, hi there. Oh, you're coming in the really intense part, and that's okay. Just hang with us, though. Don't run away. So just try to imagine this, because I'm sure it's hard to imagine, but I was having experiences where there was missing time. So where I would go to sleep, and it would be one time a day. I would wake up, and it would be like the middle of the afternoon the next day, and crazy stuff like that. Like, what the heck just happened? And I was having bends in reality. Wildlife was acting weird around me. So there were birds that were circling and doing weird. I mean, it was bizarre. And then there were two of my friends who had also gone to this healer for consultations. And they were also having really weird stuff happen. So I'm talking to my friends on the phone every day, and we're texting, and I'm like, am I crazy? What is happening? And so the fact that we were able to talk to each other was very helpful, because we would often say to each other, oh my gosh, if I didn't have you to talk to, I would think I had totally lost my mind. And so all this crazy stuff is happening. And even where like different entities, not just demons, but other different entities are showing up in the house. And finally, I figure out where this is coming from. It takes me several weeks. And because why would you think that the person that you went to for help was the reason? You know, like, and someone who seems really nice, like a beautiful, lovely person, okay? So that was my first encounter, actually, with what I call false light entity, a false light entity. The reason why it's a false light entity is because it pretends to be, now it pretends with this healer, it pretends to be an angel, and sometimes it pretends to be a group of angels. That also confuses people, by the way, because how could one entity pretend to be several? But it pretends to be this group of angels, and then, and it's not, it's something else completely. That particular entity, what I came to suspect by the end of the book, I'm starting to realize that it was an entity called a djinn. I'll be honest, when it all happened, I had never even heard of jinn, except for in Middle Eastern folklore, we hear about the genie, which is like, Disney genies are cute and friendly and maybe tricksters, but I didn't even know that those were real. So I didn't even consider it. And then after I went through that situation and after I cleared that entity, then I had clients coming to me who were having either jinn or other types of entities that were doing this same trickster type of thing. But I want to also say here that when I went through everything where I was under major attack for 6 weeks, you better bet that I was reaching out to my spiritual community for assistance. And especially before I knew what was happening. I mean, I was terrified. I was like, okay, I'm aware of clearing techniques. I've done the white light, I've done the sage, I've done the prayers, I've called in Archangel Michael, I've put hematite all around the house, I've played sound healing music, like I've done all this stuff, and this thing is still terrorizing me. And what do? So I'm reaching out to colleagues and people who are elders in my community who are older than me, who've been doing this for a long time, and I get all sorts of answers. I get things, I get answers like, have you tried sage? And I'm like, oh my God, I want to pull my, yes, of course I've tried sage. And, well, have you tried white light? Yes. Okay. So in those moments, that was when I was realizing that the techniques that are so popular, they don't actually work when you're actually under attack. They are effective for soft kinds of things, like if someone had an argument in the room. But when someone's under actual attack, that shit doesn't work. Sorry, I cuss sometimes, sorry. The other answer that I got from people was, well, because of the law of attraction, you must have drawn this to you because you must have some darkness within you. And dark entities don't even exist, so you're just creating this. So there was a lot of blaming, and I was like, oh my gosh, I am terrified, and I'm asking for help, and now there's people who are blocking me and unfriending me, colleagues that I've had for 20 years, who are saying they don't want to talk to me anymore because clearly I have some darkness within. And so that was equally traumatic. That was very, very upsetting. I mentioned that not so you can feel sorry for me, but because it's so prevalent that when people have major unwanted paranormal encounters, so often they'll be told by honest spiritual seekers who really believe that, anything that shows up is what you caused. And that's not helpful. Like, that didn't help me clear the djinn. Like, it was an actual real entity. And I know this for a fact because I've encountered similar entities with my clients. And so now I can say with total confidence that I know exactly what djinn look like, feel like, and sound like compared to demonic entities, compared to human souls that have embodied more of the dark side and are confused and lost, compared to many other kinds of entities. I know what it feels like. So anyway, then I went on to really understand this whole idea of false light entities, the fact that there are so many that there are so many negative beings who are pretending to be beings of light. Let's get into that now. Let's get into defining. I will say that this whole major incident happened the spring of 2016. And then that whole summer of 2016, I remember feeling like I was experiencing a huge spiritual download. Have you ever had that before, where there's a period in your life, maybe it's like during or after a really intense experience that you've had, and you end up feeling like you're getting this download of information? And I remember I was having a conversation with somebody, just talking with them about psychic protection and the spiritual realm and explaining everything that's going on. And I remember stopping and saying, like, how do I even know this? I was telling her, this is what works for clearing out this is what works for clearing out that. And most of the books are talking about stuff that doesn't work. And I was like, well, yeah, but how do I know this? And I really think that the intensity of what I went through, it was a catalyst for this download. So after that, then I was holding this new information. So that was when I started teaching what I knew. Let me get a quick drink here. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, I'm going to give you a definition of what false light entities are. Before I get into that, though, does anybody have any burning questions? You guys are all sitting and listening intently.
Eventually, you're going to tell us how you resolved this initial problem.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, actually, I think it'll fit in better. I think it'll fit in best now. How I resolved that initial problem. So I ended up using a combination of burning frankincense and other resins. Now, that didn't take care of the problem completely, but that did move it out of the house. I also then discovered that there were items that I had acquired from that spiritual teacher that were basically acting as portals, that were creating access points for that entity to keep coming back in. So, by the way, you guys, I saw some of you nod. Burning frankincense is definitely more powerful than sage. It's not a be-all, end-all, but it can definitely help clear the air, literally, enough so that you can try to use some other techniques as well. But I ended up realizing there was a piece of jewelry that I had purchased while I was at a group session with this teacher that I had put next to my bed, thinking that it was protective, and every night I was getting attacked. And so I ended up I took that out. There was a book that I had bought from this teacher, and actually I looked at the book differently one day. I had just been on the floor doing yoga, and this actually was the point when I realized this whole thing was from her. Was that I was in my yoga brain space, where my mind was really open. And I remember I had been on the floor doing my yoga thinking, am I going to have this entity attacking me for the rest of my life? Like, I need to, I don't know what to do about this. So I'm trying to calm myself down and do yoga breathing. And then I finished my 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, I'm calmer now. Because as you can imagine, I was having panic attacks, right? And then I stand up, and the book that I had purchased from this teacher was right there on the table. And I looked at it in my very, meditative, post-meditative mind, and I said, oh my God. So on the cover of the book, there was this whole motif. I'm not going to give exact details because, again, I never give details that will identify this person. But it was basically a motif, and there was a kind of a design to it. And when I looked at it, I saw there were demon faces all over the cover of the book, hidden in plain sight. They were all over. And I was like, I didn't see this before. And then all of a sudden, once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. So then I took those items and I removed them from the house. And so that was one thing that I did to take care of the problem.
Did you put them in the car and throw them away? Did you give them back to her?
First, what I did, also, I discontinued contact 100%. Now, I'm someone who is very pro-communication if there's an issue. But this thing was terrorizing me. And I knew that I had to have no more contact ever with this person. Block, and this is what I recommend. If anyone is connected like this person with something that's terrorizing you paranormally, you need to block, no contact. So I blocked on Facebook, I blocked on phone, canceled my next appointment. I had no contact ever after that. I removed the items and put them in my garage because I still called my friend and I said, I just still can't believe this. I don't want to believe it, And so later, though, I ended up burning the items. So although, what I'll say is that I wish that I hadn't burned them. I wish that I had taken them off the property in my car and buried them in the ground with salt. Because I feel that when I burned them, that it released energy. But all the spiritual teachers I was talking to were saying, you need to burn. But I wouldn't recommend burning. Nope. Because it was like a hellfire. When that fire was very freaky. So I also used I did a candle ritual of reversing entity attack. So there were several things that I did, and I do explain all of it in my book, and there's step-by-step, totally step-by-step process if you want to know exactly how to do it. I make it really simple in the book. By the way, I've had people who have bought my book because they were under attack, and then they would call me and say, well, the candle thing didn't work, but it would turn out, but they were still living with the person who was calling in the psychic attack or whatever. You haven't taken care of the root of the problem. I don't care how much frankincense you burn or if it's the best ever that has ever existed in reality. I don't care how strong that frankincense is. If you don't take care of, or the candle or the whatever, if you haven't taken care of the root of the issue, it's not going away. So yes, I thank you. I appreciate you asking that. Yes, sir. Question.
Do you still have the video?
Yeah, actually I do.
What was the question?
Do I still have the video where the entity showed up? I do. So if you email me, I will, yeah. So just remind me though, and I'll I'll email you specifically. Yeah, just put a little thing next to your name. Yeah, but I'm not going to email it to everybody, so put a note next to your name. Yeah.
Where's a good place to buy frankincense?
A good place to buy frankincense. I don't know if I have the best recommendation. It's kind of... yeah, where?
In Tucson, any of the metaphysical stores are
They're going to have it? Okay.
Well, yeah, so...
Actually, also Dry River, they have really good products
Dry
on
River.
4th Avenue.
Okay. I just didn't know if some was better than others.
Yeah, I think... You know what? And there's also... I forget the name of the shop. It's a candle and metaphysical shop. I don't know if anyone knows what that's.
There's a lot of them around.
Okay. Well, anyway.
East side of town?
Yeah, I think so. Anyway, thanks.
Aquavita has them just down the street also. They also have Copop.
Who does?
Aquavita on Country Club.
So I would say, as far as where to get your frankincense, I know that some people, when they've bought it on Amazon, they're not always happy with the quality and if it works well for them. So you might try finding one of your local shops, and then, if you don't like that one, go to a different shop, or use whatever technique that you've learned, whether it's muscle testing or your pendulum or your gut feeling as to which shop you should go to. Yeah, just remember that the frankincense is one tool, so it's a combination of building up your own inner strength and knowing that you are powerful, and exerting your healthy boundaries, right? Your healthy discernment and your healthy boundaries, along with using some physical tools. Okay, so let's go on and define false light entities. What they are. So, as you might imagine from the name, false light entity, it is pretending to be light, and it's false, so it's not actually a light being. These can be any type of negative entity that is a trickster or a shapeshifter. There are many types of shapeshifter entities out there. The djinn are one type. By the way, djinn are from Middle Eastern folklore, but they're everywhere. I've actually encountered one here in Tucson already. That might be another story. But let me look here. Okay. So raise your hand if you think maybe you may have encountered an entity that was pretending to be a light being that was not really a light being. Yes, we have some hands up. Okay. Yeah. So that's why you're here. So let's talk about why. Why would a being pretend to be a being of light? The whole reason is to trick you, because if they trick you, then you will welcome them into your life and into your field and into your healing practice and so on. So if you think that it's Archangel Michael, let's say, and I love Archangel Michael, by the way, the real Archangel Michael. If you think that it's Archangel Michael, or you think that it's Ascended Master so-and-so, or you think that it's the Council of Orion, then of course, why wouldn't you welcome them in? Because it sounds amazing, right? Like, how cool is that so-and-so is trying to communicate with you? So they want you to welcome them in so they can hook in. Why do they want to hook in? They want to feed off of your energy. Now, negative beings like to feed off of two kinds of energy. They want to feed off of suffering, and they want to feed off of adoration. A lot of people don't realize that. So not only do dark energies want to feed off of all kinds of suffering and pain and hatred and greed and all of that, and fear, yes, thank you, but they want to feed off of adoration. So this djinn that I encountered recently here in Tucson loves adoration,
What
like
does that mean? Adoration.
worshipped. It wants to be worshipped.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it loves that everybody thinks that it's some special thing, and it loves that worship energy, man. Let me tell you. Oh, and you know what? I've just realized that I left out a really, really important detail when I was explaining my history, so that just so you know, when I say like that I had this experience with this djinn here in town, and that I know this or that or whatever, you may have already guessed this, but that I'm clairvoyant, so I've been able to see energies and spirits, all sorts of beings, angels, Jesus, all sorts of things ever since I was young. I'm also clairaudient. I hear things. I'm clairsentient. I feel things in my body. So that's how I get a lot of my information. So they will trick you. They want you to welcome them in so that they can hook in and feed off of your energy. They also want to be able to hook into your life so they can connect to your connections. Like, let's say you have an energy practice of some kind, or you're a teacher and they want to hook into all of that web. That's very common. They also, sometimes false light entities want to feed information, energy into, rather than sucking energy out, rather than feeding off of suffering and worship. They sometimes want to feed information, as in false channeling. Okay? So that actually happens a lot. There's a lot of, and I know this has been a very unpopular part of my message with people in the past, but that there's a lot of what I call hijacking in channeled messages. Now, I'm not against channeling. I'm not against channeled messages at all. But what I know to be true is that a lot of messages end up getting hijacked because people don't know about how to identify a false light entity when they're connecting with a being. And in fact, this issue that I had a month ago when I encountered a false light, when I encountered a djinn, I need a drink. I tell you what, that sucker was pretty darn convincing. Like, it was pretending to be the Council of Orion, and it sure felt pretty cool. You know, I mean, it's pretty convincing. So it's very easy for that stuff, for those kinds of entities to fool people because they're super convincing. Excuse me. Let me get back into my notes. And the third reason why they will pretend to be a light being is to throw you off of your life mission so that you're not fully on. Okay, so there is actually a negative agenda with true light workers. I have some allergies, so I'm going to suck on a lozenge here. There is a negative agenda with genuine light workers to throw them onto a false path, whether that is to pair them up with a romantic partner who is abusive, and that's done intentionally, or to send false light entity to them to get them so busy channeling messages that aren't real, so that they're not actually doing the work that they came here to do. Or there's no space for the real messages to come through that are supposed to come through. Okay? So let's talk about a couple of false light entity scenarios. I'm going to talk about 3 different scenarios. So the individual scenario, when an individual person ends up having an encounter with a false light entity. Let's just pretend that they don't realize that it's a false light entity. So let's say the individual is praying or meditating or doing their spiritual practice, and in their meditation, perhaps a new spirit guide shows up, or an angel, or an ascended master, or maybe a loved one who's on the other side. And by the way, I want to be really clear that that angels, guides, ascended masters, loved ones, can authentically show up. And I've seen that all the time in my work, to be able to see angels or to see loved ones show up during a reading. But sometimes what will show up is not what it's pretending itself to be. Now, I've had clients and students who've reached out to me, like their very first session with me, they'll say, I reached out to you because I was meditating and I keep feeling like Ascended Master so-and-so is my new spirit guide and that we're supposed to be working together. And for a week straight, I kept seeing his face and it just felt so special. And then one time when I was meditating, it was almost as though something slipped and I saw what was underneath and it looked really scary. And then suddenly the face was lovely again. And I said, and they said, what was that? Do I have anything to worry about? And so then what I do with my skill set is I tune in. I don't assume anything. I'm not like thinking that everything out there is false light entities. So I will tune in and I'll be like, okay, is this an authentic guide or is this a false light entity? In that instance, it was false. And this particular person had developed enough discernment and healthy boundaries that she was able to see that slip in the facade for that split moment and realize that something wasn't right. It seems like there are some people who are more targeted by this kind of thing than others. It seems like some of my clients, they will have a false light entity that has been trying to mess with them, and then we get that one to leave, and then every time they think they have a new spirit guide, it's always something that shouldn't be there. And then there's other people that end up not having too many issues with it. So there's some people who are a little more targeted than others. And some people who are super targeted who don't want to see that they are. And by the way, you may be able to guess this, that if you develop your spidey sense, your radar for false light, which I believe everybody is capable of doing, you can develop that sense. And if you have a friend that you're like, ooh, whatever she's working with right now doesn't feel good, 9 times out of 10, if you tell them directly, they don't want to believe it. So that's actually part of why I have the approach that I do, that I will teach groups of people, and then what you decide to do with the knowledge is up to you. Because usually when somebody is already working with something like that, it'll try so hard to convince them that it's kind of hard to get them to see the truth until they're ready. So I'm talking about false light entity scenarios. We've got the individual scenario where oftentimes it's a spirit guide that's not real. A lot of times that's the scenario. The second scenario is a group scenario where you're at a spiritual event, perhaps a sound healing concert, or some kind of spiritual gathering where there are altered states and that sort of thing. By the way, I love sound healing concerts, but I use that as an example because I want you to just think about it. Think about the fact that if you've been to a sound healing concert, you can feel how it's really opening up your energy, right? And that's not a bad thing. It feels really good. But it's also, what's happening to the whole group is everybody's energies are getting opened up. And it is such juicy energy It's such a juicy kind of spot for a false light entity to come into. They say, "Ooh, look, there's that. Look at all that light emanating, and that looks really yummy. Like that just looks so delicious." And so it's very, very common for false light stuff to come in during those kinds of events. And just because we're raising the vibration through singing bowls or whatever, that doesn't keep out false light entities. And I know that people who are major believers in the law of attraction have trouble with this part. Just because the vibration goes up doesn't mean that negative stuff can't enter. False light is very good at it like entrains to that higher vibration. In fact, a lot of times when there's a false light entity present, one of the things that alerts me is that I will hear a high-pitched frequency. It's almost like it's almost like the entity is overcompensating and trying real hard to pretend to be a light being, because I will hear this high-pitched frequency and I'll see this light that like blinds my eyes. It doesn't look like genuine light that is very soothing and beautiful. It's this overcompensating, blinding kind of light. At these group events, it's very common for portals to end up opening and for false light entities to come in and hook into people. One of the problems is that a lot of very genuine, well-meaning spiritual facilitators don't understand how to establish a safe, energetic space. A lot of spiritual facilitators believe that this kind of stuff doesn't exist and believe that negative stuff doesn't exist. And therefore, since they don't believe any of that, they're not going to set up a safe space. So on that note, don't assume that whatever event that you go to at like a yoga studio or whatever, don't assume that they know how to protect you or how to keep a safe space. You now know more than most of them based on now what I've shared with you. So it'll be up to you to keep a safe, sacred space. We'll talk about that again in a little bit. So that's the second scenario, is a group energy. I'll give you an example of, I went to a sound healing concert years ago. This is, hang on. It was this event where there was these really lovely young adults that were creating music with their machines, like their computer devices, and with live instruments. And it was a really neat thing that they were doing. But they also didn't understand how to create a safe space. And also the owner of the center was someone who believed that all negativity doesn't exist. That was her belief system, which I totally respect. But as I was sitting there and the sound healing experience was starting and everybody had made their little cozy little spot with their blankets and they're laying on the floor having their experience, what I'm doing, I'm sitting there with my back up against the wall and I'm trying to relax and I'm wanting to crawl out of my skin. And I'm like, why am I feeling so uncomfortable? I feel like I need to run out of this place. So I open my eyes and I see clairvoyantly there's a big portal, like a doorway, like a fissure in the time space that opens, and there's this doorway and all these entities start pouring in and they're all they're going through the room. And I'm like, okay, well, not all of them are beneficial. Not all of them coming in are beneficial. And But I also don't feel like I'm the energy police. I didn't say, stop the event. I said, okay, well, this is what the facilitator is. She's wanting to do this event. This is not right for me at this time. So I went ahead and just slid out the door. And I messaged her later and said I wasn't feeling well. And I did sort of try to tell her what I saw, but what I was explaining isn't her language, right? So that's fine. But I never went back to another sound healing concert at that center because they were bringing in stuff that wasn't beneficial for me. And I don't believe it was beneficial for anybody there, actually. The facilitator did say, oh, well, everyone had such a wonderful time. And like, it's such a shame that you left. So I'm sure they had a wonderful time. And I'm going to tell you in just a minute, after we finish the third false light entity scenario, I'm going to tell you again, I'm going to go into detail of why they all had such a wonderful time. The third false light entity scenario is spiritual teacher who has a false light entity attachment. This is actually really common. And as you've noticed, I go out of my way to make sure we're not ever finger pointing or anything. That's not okay. So we don't want to leave here going, well, I think so-and-so spiritual teacher has blah, blah, blah. Let's not do that. But it is very, very common that there are a lot of spiritual teachers and healers who just don't know what this is, so they don't even know to look for it, right? And so it's the biggest targets for this are spiritual teachers who have the belief system that the negative stuff doesn't exist. I don't know if you've encountered people that have that belief system. Again, I respect all beliefs out there. But my observation has been that the people who are most targeted for this kind of thing are the people who believe that none of that exists. So how easy is it for that stuff to hook in and pretend that it's Ascended Master Hilarion or whoever, fill in the blank. And so what happens is here's the spiritual teacher. They have this false light entity attachment, and then all of the students or clients that they work with all get hooked in to this matrix. And that was something that I started to have visions of in the summer after I went through that psychic attack and I was getting that download, was I was seeing this whole, like these webs throughout the city where I was living. I was seeing like this, it was all this whole matrix of like all these people who were going to healers and they were all getting hooked in. And it was really hard to be able to see that. And also with the knowledge that if you try to tell people directly, they don't want to hear it. They just don't. So you have to just, at least my experience has been to just allow people to have whatever experience they're having, and I'll give them the book if they want to read it. So those are the three main scenarios: individual, group, and spiritual teacher healer. And I mentioned a minute ago that I'm going to talk about why the people at the sound healing concert had such a great time, why they loved it so much. And there's actually there's a lesson in my book where I teach about 2 indicators that a negative entity is hooking into you. These 2 indicators. The first indicator is that you'll feel sick. You might feel shaky, dizzy, disoriented, headachy, nauseous. It definitely feels like something's going on, right? And that's happening because you've experienced a sudden shift in your vibration. So anytime your vibration shifts suddenly, most likely you're not going to feel good. Okay? So if you are shifting up really, really fast because you've just had a cleansing session, that might be why you feel nauseous. But it can also be that something is hooking in and you've suddenly downshifted a whole bunch. And so pay attention to that. The second indicator that an entity could be attaching to you is something that a lot of people don't think about, and this is feelings of bliss. How often is it that you go to a spiritual event and there's all this stuff happening, the sounds and everything, and now I'm not talking about a grounded, peaceful, centered, embodied sort of feeling. I'm talking about when you feel blissed out of your mind and your personal energy isn't even really in your body anymore, and your body is out here above your head, your energy is out here above your head, and you're like, wow, I feel like I'm on drugs. This is so great. And then you're just like, you're in this worship energy or this like ecstasy kind of energy. That's what I'm talking about. When everybody is getting into that, that's when you need to be careful, because that is prime, that's like prime rib for these kind of entities, okay? It's very juicy energy. So those are the two indicators that a negative entity could be hooking in. That's important when you go out into the world now, from now on, and you go to a spiritual event, which I'm sure you probably will go to future events, and you're going to use your own discernment and notice if something suddenly feels different within you, in your body, or with your energy, right? So you'll learn to notice those differences and then decide, okay, is there something negative going on? And even if you're not sure, like maybe you're not totally sure if it's a false light entity or if it's something negative, or maybe you're not sure if it is anything negative, but maybe you've just decided, you know what, I don't think this is a fit for me at this time. It seems like everybody's having a great time, but I feel like there's something off with the energy here. I think it's important to allow yourself permission to remove yourself from a space or from a group event if something isn't feeling right, if it feels like the energy is off, right? I think so often we don't want to look crazy, or we don't want to be rude by leaving early, or we don't want to lose our money, because I actually paid like a couple $100 one time for an event, and I ended up I went ahead, I gave myself permission to leave, because I said, okay, so I lose that $200, but let's say I stay and, like, to quote, get my money's worth, but at what cost? Because in my book I talk about this retreat that I went to that I call the retreat from hell, because it was like the worst ever. And it was a $500 retreat, and I didn't leave because I didn't want to lose my money. And that was a big lesson for me, because I realized afterwards, it took me 2 weeks to clear my energy after that event. And it was also a big lesson to me that even though the facilitators are lovely people, and the other people at the retreat are nice people, like there was no one evil at the event. It wasn't like that. But they just simply didn't understand how to establish safe spiritual space. And a lot of people were psychically attacked and had entity issues after that event. So it was a big lesson that a lot of people putting on events don't necessarily know how to keep you safe. But you have to be responsible for keeping yourself safe. So I'm going to give you some tips, and then we're going to open it up to more questions. How does that sound? You guys have been awesome so far. I know it's late, it's dark. We've got about 15 or so minutes left. So here are my tips for dealing with this issue, this false light issue. Number 1, have your own daily spiritual practice. And I know it's easier said than done. Like, oh, yeah. Well, you have to be doing something so that you are tapped in, tuned in to your own inner guidance. It's so common nowadays. I work with students all the time that are constantly wanting to bypass their own inner essence and say, well, but what do my guides say? What do my guides say? What do my guides say? Okay, I love guides. I work with guides. But let's first and foremost, your spiritual practice should be about connecting within. Okay, so that's my number one tip. You need to have a daily spiritual practice where you're just being present with you. From there, then if you want to work with outside source, with earth energy, with divine source, with angels, with guides, then from your own inner core wisdom, you'll be able to discern that what's coming in is valid or not. Okay, so it's also a good idea if you are wanting to work with those kinds of beings to have a daily practice where you're developing your relationship with them so that you know what it feels like. Because if you are not working with your guides and angels at all, and then all of a sudden something shows up and it's like, hi, I'm so-and-so, and you're like, wow, and you've never worked with anything like that before, it might be easy to get sucked in because you don't have a relationship established with your authentic guides and angels. Learn to check your own energy. On a daily basis, you should be able to just sit quietly in meditation, even for 3 minutes, and tune into your field and notice if there's anything that doesn't belong. Whether it's the, energy from the angry driver that just drove past you in traffic, or an entity that hopped onto you because you were at the wrong place at the wrong time, getting gas at the gas station, and something hopped, because entities do hop. So it's important to check your energy on a daily basis, not to be paranoid, but simply like just brushing your teeth. You brush your teeth not because you're paranoid about cavities, but because it's just a smart thing to do, right? So on a daily basis, you want to just check your energy and clear out anything before it becomes a major problem. You also want to develop your own psychic skills. I know some of you are already very developed, but the more your skills are developed, the better off you're going to be. I work with people sometimes who will say, well, I've experienced some things that were scary to me, and so I shut down my skills. I shut down all my abilities. And I say, okay, I understand why you did that, but would you walk across a busy street with your eyes squeezed shut because you're like, oh my God, I'm afraid of cars, and if I open my eyes, I might see one, and you see what I'm saying? So it's really important for you to be able to develop your skills so you know what's happening so you can do something about it. So if there is a car coming, then you can move out of the way and avoid it, right? So I'm a big proponent of developing your psychic skill sets, your intuition, whatever it is that you want to call it, your gut feeling, your spidey sense, your clairvoyance, whatever. I would encourage a healthy sense of caution with all beings and with everything, not fear. When we go into fear, that's when we do start to attract some negative stuff. Caution is different. Caution is being smart and recognizing what's what and just being aware. So I do encourage a healthy sense of caution. I also will say, don't take false light entities lightly, especially djinn. And at this point, you might not know how to discern what's what with these different kinds of entities, but don't take them lightly. I'll give you an example. So I mentioned before that about a month ago, I had an encounter here in Tucson with a false light entity. And a couple of days later, I was telling a colleague of mine about how I had had this encounter at this place. And she said, "Oh, honey," she said, "I'll go to that place with you. I'll hold your hand. Nothing messes with me ever." And I looked at her, I said, "You are taking it too lightly. Like, you need to get more serious about this thing." Because she's like, "Well, I'm going to go there tomorrow." And I'm like, "No, not smart." That's an example of taking it lightly, okay? You definitely need to take it seriously. When it comes to jinn, I will tell people again and again, those things are worse than demons, okay? And I say that because they are basically like sociopaths/psychopaths in spiritual form. They are major boundary violators. They are super manipulators. They're pretty nasty, and they do not go when you ask them to go. So you don't want to be like, "Oh, I'll go to the place that has one of those. It'll be fine." No, because it's going to take you forever to get rid of that thing. So don't take it lightly. Get professional advice or help if whatever you're encountering is beyond your current knowledge, right? So ask me or ask somebody who knows. Remember, and I say this with the utmost love and respect, remember that most spiritual teachers don't know about false light entities to the extent that I'm explaining it to you. Because I'm trying to get this information out there. All right. So if you go to a spiritual teacher and you're like, "Well, I want to know about, is this a false light entity?" Well, that kind of thing might not even really be on their radar. So you might not get as an informed answer from them as you possibly could. So just think about that if you're going to someone for advice. Don't assume that an event facilitator or a healer or what have you knows how to keep you energetically safe. You now know more than most. So it's going to be up to you to take care of your own safety. If something doesn't feel right, that's a red flag. Okay? So pay attention to your red flags and trust yourself. Stop second guessing yourself. That's a big one. A lot of people will look around the room and go, "Well, everybody else at that event seemed okay." And I did this all the time before. I would say, well, maybe I'm just crazy. Like, how come I'm seeing this stuff and no one else is? And so I would second guess. And I think it's really important to stop second guessing yourself. If you notice some red flags, just trust it. You don't even have to know what it all means. Trust it enough to be able to just say, maybe XYZ isn't the right fit for me at this time. You don't have to know it's a false light entity or whatever it is. You just be able to decide, is this a match for me or not? If it's not, I'm going to go ahead and release it. Of course, then I'm here to help you to develop a foundation of better discernment. But ultimately, you have to learn to trust yourself. So when I work with my clients, they will ask me things like, "Okay, I'm kind of feeling like," whatever information they're getting, "I'm kind of feeling like this or that is a negative thing. But what are you getting, Maya?" And so when they're asking me something like that, it's not because they're depending on me for the answer. It's that they're still trying to figure out how to trust themselves. And sometimes when you get that validation, when I say, "Okay, well, this is what I'm getting," and they go, "Okay, all right, so I was right." I'm like, "Yes, you were right." So that's what I'm here for, is to help you to develop that discernment about this stuff and to answer your questions with the goal of you being able to develop your own discernment. Does that make sense? Okay, so I have just shared a ton of stuff with you. There's a whole bunch more material that's in the book that I didn't even talk about. And I also have a YouTube channel that has like over 50 hours of free class content. So if you feel like you want to go on YouTube, it's Psychic Protection Sanctuary, and it's actually here on my card if you want to get a card. You can come on up. That's fine. Yeah. There's a ton of free content on there where I don't just talk about false light entities, but just about how all of this stuff works, about how psychic attack works, about the psychological manipulation that some people experience when they're under attack and they don't understand what's happening. And then I have other videos online that are a little bit softer, more about developing your spiritual gifts and things like that. So if that interests you. Do we have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Would you consider reptilians to be false light entities?
Okay, so that is a great question. The question is, would I consider reptilians to be false light entities? Okay. Yeah. It's okay.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. So for those who may or may not know, reptilians are a type of alien entity, and they are interdimensional, which means that, well, I think you know what that means. They can go between dimensions. They are known to be shapeshifters. So now I'll just say, as far as my terminology, I don't often refer to reptilians as false light entities per se, but they are shapeshifters, and because of that, they do often pretend to be a variety of things. So, and there's another category, to just expand on your question. Now that here we're in the Southwest, there's something called skinwalkers, and they are shapeshifters, and they will shapeshift into animals and sometimes loved ones in order to trick you. So there's a lot of different beings out there that will pretend.
Not all reptilians are like that. Some are good. Yeah. I believe some are good.
Yeah. Well, so
I don't know.
yeah. Well, I feel like that's a whole other rabbit hole that we could go down, is kind of beyond our topic. But yeah, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Yeah. So, but it is true that they are shapeshifters. Reptilians are shapeshifters, and that there are many that are negative beings. That they are definitely the sociopathic, psychopathic kind of mind game, wanting to terrorize people kind of entity, for sure.
A lot of people like that.
Yes. Do we have any
Are you able
other
to
questions?
sense, if there's any attached to people just by meeting them? Or?
Yes. Now I'll say this: those of you who are empaths will probably be able to relate to this. With your question, am I able to sense whether someone has false light entities? That when I'm, for example, when I'm teaching right now, I'm focusing on teaching and I'm not tuning into all of you to be able to discern that. Or if I'm at the grocery store, I'm not usually tuning into that, because as an empath, it would just be like overwhelming, and it would be hard for me to concentrate on the material that I'm teaching. But when I'm doing a one-on-one session, either in person, and I also work with people all over the world, even over the phone, I can tune into people and be able to determine not only if they have a false light entity, but any kind of entity attachments, how many and what kind, and what needs to be done to remove them. So, yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Any other questions before we wrap up? Yes.
Just to add on about the reptilians and skinwalkers.
Yes.
Fifth density. All humans are fourth density, so we can't do that. We can't shape-shift. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of life is to get to the fifth and sixth density.
Yeah.
And I thought Orions were bad guys.
Well, I'm not saying that they're good, bad, or otherwise, but that there was this being that was saying that it is from the Council of Orion, and it was saying that it was benevolent and trying to help and give a message. And so this djinn that I had this encounter with a month ago, I said, well, I don't necessarily believe that you are that Council of Orion and that you have a positive message for me. And you know what it did? Then it changed from the council, from these like ET looking things. It changed and turned into a whole bunch of demons, and it was trying to scare me. And if I hadn't been through everything I talk about in my book, I would have been like, oh my God, there's demons in my room, which is what terrified me in 2016. This time I was like, you better stop that crap right now. As I said, I know exactly what you're doing, so just stop it. But it's like, okay, so it's trying to come through to manipulate me. That doesn't work, so now let's try to scare her. And so that's a very common tactic with djinn in particular. Yeah.
Orion, I believe that there might be some good, but the Palladians are the good guys, and that's why the chemtrails are up there, so you don't see the battles going on in the sky. Mm-hmm. It's part of the reason for the chemtrails.
Thank you. I think we have another question.
Actually, I have two. The first one is,
okay.
How did you get to the Orion thing from the reptilians? And the second one is, you said you were attacked, and it seemed like you expected us to know what that meant, and I'd be interested in hearing some more of what your experience actually was.
Yeah, well, you asked about the Orion thing. This wonderful gentleman just said something about how his opinion on the Orion Council, and that was why I just started talking about that. Yeah. So I appreciate your question about that. I never did really define what psychic attack is, so I'll go ahead and define that briefly before we're out of time for tonight. So a psychic attack is a form of spiritual warfare where a person is being sent negative energy. So there's actually a couple ways that this can happen. The negative energy transference can happen because there's an entity, a spiritual being, that's attacking the person. Or it can also occur if someone does black magic, a hex, or negative spell work towards a person to cause them ill intent. That's another form of psychic attack. And there's another form of psychic attack that a lot of people don't think about, and it's when someone is sending very focused negative thoughts and intentions, even if they don't know about energy or black magic or anything like that, but every day they're just sending hateful thoughts to somebody. The person they're thinking about can end up receiving it and feeling it like they're being psychically attacked. They might feel sick, they might feel anxiety or depression, or things might start breaking around their house. There's a lot of different symptoms that can happen, but those are all different forms of psychic attack. And the type that I was going through in 2016 was the type where an entity was messing with me.
And you experienced what as a result?
I experienced...
What as a result? What was your actual experience? Was it depression? Was it things breaking around the house? I mean, have you given us the details and I just didn't catch it?
Okay, so when I was being psychically attacked, I was terrified. And actually at one point, this entity reached into my body and tried to tear my soul out of my body. And it was the most terrifying experience of my entire life. I thought the thing was going to kill me. So imagine that you have
You saw that and you felt it?
Yes. It woke me up in the middle of the night. I was sound asleep. I wake up because I feel something. I wake up, I open my eyes, and there's this being above my body, and I see it's like this amorphous plasma energy, and it reaches forward and yanks me, and I also heard it speak too. But that I'll let you read the book if you wanna.
It's like a haggy. You know what a haggy is?
Yes, I do.
But it's different than
This was part of a larger attack.
haggy. Okay.
Yeah. This was part of a much larger experience. So if someone is being attacked by an entity, like, well, so what happens? You're freaking terrified. You think you're going to die. I mean, it's like someone's in your house going to murder you. I mean, it's really, really scary. And yeah, things were breaking. Lights were flashing in the house. So yeah, I would say that's definitely an effect for sure. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
My question's a lot simpler.
Sure, it's fine. And by the way, I don't mind. Like I love questions, so it's all good.
Okay. When I channel, I basically channel to my spiritual family. Usually it's the whole family at one time. And now I've had so many questions with all this information they've been giving to me. And at one point, about 2 years ago, I had asked my spiritual family a question and received the wrong answer.
Okay.
And I didn't understand why. So I went back to a friend in Vegas and asked, and she said that I was asking too many questions, which now I know was not the right answer.
So a red flag can be if you ask a spiritual being a question and they give you false information or misleading information. That can be a red flag, that it is not, that being is not who they say they are, or they are not benevolent like they say they are.
Okay.
It could be.
If you say some kind of protection thing, that I only want honest and true answers with no outside entities, is that enough protection to...
Right. So is it enough protection to state a clear boundary that only those that are true and honest, blah, 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 will come through? So let me ask you this. If there's a person who is a total sociopath, who doesn't honor boundaries, who loves to manipulate people, and you set a boundary with them, do you think they're going to honor it? Or do you think they're going to pretend that they honor it?
Okay, they're not going to honor it.
Right.
Even though I was the believer that they all have to.
Okay, so that's an important distinction. This is something that I had major existential crisis over for like months and months and months. The fact that benevolent beings are they follow the universal laws. They honor our free will. Benevolent beings honor our free will. Malevolent beings break the laws all the time. And they ignore boundaries, they break laws, they break soul contract stuff, they interfere with stuff they're not supposed to interfere with. Yeah, this has been wonderful, you guys. Thank you so much. I would love to keep it open for more questions, but I want to be respectful of the space, and we're a little bit over on our time. But any questions that you may have, you can email me, and you can email me on my website here, or you can also stay after for like just a couple quick moments, but then I know we need to go. So you can get my contact information that way. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate all of you being here and keeping an open mind. Thanks so much.